Hello, my name is Sam Feltham and welcome to Expert Interviews here on Smash the Fat. Welcome to 2016, and we've got one heck of an interview for you today to kick off 2016. I'd like to introduce the amazing Dr. David Ludwig. How's it going, David?
Great to be with you from the States.
Yeah, all the way in Boston, right?
Boston, yes, it's final.
That's where you're an endocrinologist and researcher at Harvard Medical School?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Harvard Medical School and Harvard School of Public Health.
Wow, so ticking all the boxes to be probably one of the most qualified people on the planet to talk about losing weight, essentially.
Well, if you're going to make some provocative or radical statements, good to have the foundations in place.
Absolutely, that's right. Now, this book that we're going to be chatting about today, which is Always Hungry, if people can see that on my iPad there, is a fantastic book. This has been in the works for almost decades, it must be, in your head, because it's a seriously comprehensive book on conquering cravings, retraining your fat cells, and losing weight permanently as well. Absolutely fantastic stuff. I mean, as I say, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Always Hungry, Dr. David Ludwig's new book, which you can get on Amazon. And if you go to smashthefat.com/HungryUS or smashthefat.com/HungryUK, that'll take you through to the appropriate Amazon stores where you can get the book straight away, either Kindle, paperback, hardback, and Audible as well, I believe. As well, you've even got an audio version, which is fantastic. So you're hitting all the aspects there, David, for sure.
The audio version, I'll just say, my wife developed oversaw development of all the recipes and meal plans, and so she did the voices of the testimonials on the Audible, and I did the rest of it. So it was kind of a little husband and wife collaboration there.
Nice, that's fantastic. And before we get into all of that, tell us a little bit about your journey to where you are today.
Oh, sure. Well, I was always interested in food just personally, because even as a child, during the beginning of the junk food generation, I remember Captain Crunch had just come out, and that was daily fare. But even though I ate that junk, I somehow always experienced some negative responses in my body. I was aware that there was something the matter with it, didn't feel good, but I didn't have the consciousness to do anything about it. And then my path took me into research and into medicine. After I finished my medical training, I got involved in obesity research, but in the laboratory. So the basic stuff, looking at genes that affect body weight. And I began to both feel amazed at the beauty and complexity of the control systems that affect our appetite, our metabolism, body weight, but also really didn't see the direct connection between finding another gene that might change body weight in a mouse and the medical problem I was seeing with my patients, the families that were struggling with weight. I didn't see how that research would directly influence public health, patient care. Fortunately at that time, with my training as an endocrinologist, I began thinking about food in a very different way. I read some of the, great nutrition scientists of the last century, Cahill, Jean Meyer. I also started reading the popular diet book authors at the time, Atkins, Barry Sears, and the like. And that really helped me shift out of a calorie in, calorie out model of body weight control, which was, of course, the dominant paradigm, still the dominant paradigm. The USDA new guidelines here in the US, the first line item in the new guidelines is that you need to control your calorie intake to match your expenditure. And I think that has been a failed paradigm, because You know, it works very well for toaster ovens, but humans aren't machines. We are dynamic biological systems that adapt to calorie change. And we can obviously talk more about that. But I began to see this more clearly because my training was as an endocrinologist, not as a standard nutritionist. I became interested in how food affects hormones, even the expression of genes, based not just on the number of calories, but more importantly, the type of calories. And that launched me into a career in clinical research, working with patients and doing research on humans rather than on mice. And I began that path about 20 years ago, and I'm really happy to be continuing with it today. My experiences from research and with patients, I've probably seen over 10,000 patients to date, have led me to want to write this book, to translate these ideas into a practical approach for people to follow.
Fantastic. And you certainly have done that. But you start off with an example of a well-known person in the States, certainly, in the book. And this is where I want to start getting into the book itself. And that's one of your presidents of the past, William Taft. Now, tell us a little bit about William Taft.
Well, he was a president a century ago, and when we were still using the calorie model. That was fashionable then, and he had a serious weight problem. And when he was, I think, Secretary of War, we call it Secretary of Defense now, but they were a little more blatant about these terms back then. He was about 300 pounds, and his doctor told him to go on to a low-calorie, low-fat diet that looks almost identical when you read because there's very beautiful account of this from his correspondence, his letters, his diary. That approach is almost unchanged today. And his result is perfectly illustrative of most people's experience. He got onto the diet, he lost some weight temporarily. A couple of years later, so I think, a couple of years later, when he was inaugurated as president of the United States, not only had he regained the weight, but he'd gained another 20 or 30 pounds. So he was his heaviest of his life. And he suffered terribly physically and emotionally from that weight. So the question, and I start the book with that very brief anecdote and ask, why is our approach to weight loss, despite all of our discoveries of the biological control systems affecting weight, our elaborate 21st century technology, why are we still using the calorie in, calorie out model of weight control, which was developed back when bloodletting was in fashion?
It's absolutely crazy, and calories initially were used for steam trains, and I still believe they are used in transport models, but we still seem to be using it for the human body. Now you've kind of split the book up into two parts, one of which being the first one, being always hungry, never losing weight, and part two, which we'll get into later, which is the always hungry solution. And you start talking about the big picture. So what's kind of the current state of our issue here?
All right. So the first part of the book is the science, because many of your viewers may be generally familiar with these theories, but I wanted to lay this out for the general public because it's critical to understand what's happening in the body, why just cutting back on calories or fat is inevitably creating a battle between mind and metabolism, and how to think in a more fundamental way about control of body weight, just as we would about control of any other regulatory system. We've somehow considered body weight different, that this is a matter of just willpower, just eat less and move more. The problem is people who can't do it, which is most people who try it, become stigmatized. that it must be their fault that they're fat. And that undoubtedly underlies why people with this particular medical problem are subject to prejudice, discrimination, abuse, bullying, sometimes with tragic consequences, especially in childhood. But my first message is that this is a biological problem more than one of willpower. It's not your fault if you're struggling with your weight, and we've got to understand that. And I think that will be hopefully very reassuring to people and help inspire the big changes that need to come. We begin the program, this part 2, which is a 3-phase program. Phase 1 is quite a high-fat diet. It's not quite the classic ketogenic diet, but we bring fat intake up to 50% to get rid of all of the processed carbs. That's scary for some people. The testimonials in the book you'll read, these are all honest testimonials, authentic from our pilot test, national pilot test in the US. People consistently said, I thought I was not going to lose weight. I was going to gain weight on this. And it took them a while before they realized how good they were feeling and that the weight loss could occur without them starving themselves, before they were ready to give up this low-fat paradigm, which has been so driven into our heads. But it's important to understand the science in order for people to then be able to make that leap.
Absolutely. And what is the science of why people are, doing all these diets, but they feel hungry, and the weight bounces back?
Yeah, well, that's the title of the book, Always Hungry. I mean, what happens when we cut back on calories? Of course, we'll start losing weight, but the body fights back. I mean, we've known this in the laboratory for decades, if not a century. Hunger, the first thing that happens is hunger goes up and metabolism slows down. So we argue, and I've got hundreds of references to support this, that the basic problem isn't too many calories in the fat cells. It's too few calories in the bloodstream. So we've got, something has triggered our fat cells to become excessively anabolic. In other words, those fat cells are on calorie storage overdrive. Now, fat cells don't do this by themselves. They take in or release calories only when commanded to do so by hormonal and neurological impulses, with insulin being the granddaddy of them all. So our diet and our lifestyle, other things, have raised insulin levels higher than they would ever have been historically. Insulin is the ultimate fat cell fertilizer. When someone with type 1 diabetes, a child, juvenile diabetes used to be called, comes in before getting treatment, invariably they're losing weight. They could be eating 5, 7, 10,000 calories a day, but they're unable to make insulin because of an autoimmune problem, and no matter how much they're eating, they lose weight. Replenish the insulin, and their weight will return to their normal trajectory. Give them too much insulin, and they'll invariably gain weight. Very well established. So for the rest of us, if we're not getting insulin by injections, the nature of the foods we're eating and some other environmental influences, stress, sleep, physical activities, affect our insulin. Too much insulin programs the fat cells to suck up too many calories, so there are too few for the rest of the body, and the brain perceives that as an energy crisis. It does what it's supposed to do. It makes us hungry, and it slows down metabolism because it thinks we're starving. We consider obesity a state of excess, but it's really a state of deficiency. Let me just give you one example. It's like the condition edema. Edemas, there's too much water in the body. It's, the legs could swell. Sometimes you can have 20 pounds of water in the extremities. But people with edema may have insatiable, unquenchable thirst because there's not enough water in the bloodstream. The water keeps leaking out into the tissues. So you tell people with edema in this situation, just drink less, you've got enough water in your body. It doesn't work because the water isn't staying where it needs to stay. You treat the cause of the edema, and the water can stay in the blood vessels, and then the thirst goes away. treat the cause of weight gain, which is fat cells on calorie storage overdrive, then those fat cells release the calories back into the bloodstream. The brain says, wow, maybe for the first time in years, I have enough, a dependable enough stream of calories. Cravings drop, hunger drops, metabolism speeds up, and you begin to lose weight with your body's cooperation, not with your body kicking and screaming.
And that's the one thing that I really get from the book is that, and I'm paraphrasing here one of your sentences, but you talk about the fact that on a low-calorie, low-fat diet, you're fighting against your biology, but with a more carbohydrate-restricted focus. One, you're going with your biology and trying to use your biology kind of against your fat in order to lose weight.
Now, let me give you another metaphor to fever. Here's the irony of just thinking of body weight as calories in, calories out. Let's say 100 years ago, some doctor, the medical establishment didn't understand the physiology of fever. And so you had a fever, and a doctor tells you, fever is just a question of heat balance. Too much heat in the body, not enough heat out of the body. So it's a simple solution. We need to get heat out of the body. So you, with your fever, just get into an ice bath, and that will solve the problem. Now, it will solve the problem temporarily if you would be willing to go into an ice bath with a fever. But just think about it. You probably wouldn't. But if you would, your temperature will drop, but your body's going to start fighting back viciously. Severe shivering, blood vessel constriction, and you'll want out of that bath very quickly. So that's why ice baths aren't popular in the treatment of fever. And for the same reason, just trying to force calories out of the body with either a lot of exercise, exercise is great, but it's got to be paired with the right diet, or, with calorie-restricted diets, sets up this fight. The body fights back, and we're not going to be, 95% of us aren't going to be successful over the long term.
Certainly. Now, you talk about a lot of very interesting studies, a lot of which you've actually done yourself. And one of the most interesting ones to me that I did read when it was initially published was the one where you discovered the metabolic advantage with a low carbohydrate diet. So can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah. So let me just say that just to clarify. So the first phase of the program is 50% fat, and we eliminate all grains, potatoes, added sugar. Phase 2, we allow people to add back whole kernel, minimally processed grains, the old world grains like steel-cut oats, buckwheat, and the like. For many people, one doesn't have to, I think for most people, we don't have to eliminate carbohydrate entirely. No. Although in states of, severe metabolic dysfunction, like, diabetes or prediabetes, that may be the quickest approach. That's why, the first phase is, borderlines a classic very low carbohydrate diet. But phase 2, we add back grains, and then phase 3, we actually let people begin to experiment with a little bit of the more processed carbohydrate according to their body's ability to handle it. We published a study in the journal Obesity just a couple months ago, the November issue, where we showed that after a month on a carbohydrate-reduced diet, metabolism changes. The beta cells in the pancreas that make insulin they calm down. They don't over-secrete insulin, and people can then tolerate more carbohydrate without the adverse metabolic effects. So you may be able to have more flexibility, but we show you a way to identify whether you need to be on the very low carbohydrate end, or whether you can actually tolerate a reasonable bit, and you decide yourself. Because the whole world isn't going to get off of grains. If we eliminated grains, 80% of the population would starve. So I'm trying to find an approach that is applicable to the widest swath of the population with the least degree of restrictiveness that lets you get your benefits that you want. And we have tracking tools and the like to accomplish that. Now, I've forgotten the question that you asked me before I went off into that.
I was just talking about the study where you showed that low-carb diets had about 300 calorie metabolic advantage.
Yeah. So especially at first, for people who've been eating a lot of processed carbohydrates. So this study we published in JAMA 2012. We brought people's weight down by, these were overweight and obese young adults, brought their weight down by about 12%. And then put them on a month at a time on one of 3 diets in a crossover fashion. So, and this was randomized. A conventional low-fat diet with 20% fat. The next stage up was sort of a low glycemic index focused Mediterranean type diet, 40% fat, which is more than most people eat. And then a 60% fat diet that looked very much like Atkins, a classic low-carb diet. And we found that, as expected, energy expenditure, so our calorie burn, and we measured this by stable isotopes, which is a very useful technique, accurate technique to look at energy expenditure in a real-life setting over many days. So the energy expenditure declined a lot, plummeted on the low-fat diet. The body was pushing back, trying to save calories. On the low-carb diet, energy expenditure didn't decline at all with the weight loss. So you could prevent the adverse effects of losing weight on your biology almost entirely, it seemed. And the 40% fat diet had an intermediate result. We did see a couple of possibly concerning issues with the low-carb diet. Cortisol excretion went up. It was highest on that diet. It was higher on that diet than on the other 2 diets. And cortisol chronically, may be indicating maybe a marker of some metabolic stress. If we're eating, for some people, forcing all your calories through fat may produce some metabolic stress, especially depending on the kinds of fat. We don't know. I'm not saying that a very low carbohydrate diet is bad. I've personally been on a ketogenic diet and felt good, but we saw that one concerning sign, and chronically elevated cortisol could have adverse effects on lean body mass, the brain, even aging. So we need more research to decide whether there is an optimal balance somewhere between low fat and very low carb, or whether some people, it's the type of fats we're eating, or whether some people will just do best on low carb, others relatively lower fat, and we have to personalize that based on insulin secretion, genomics, and other measures.
Certainly, and it'd be fantastic if one day, and I believe people are working on it, is to have an algorithm where you put in all your biometrics and then out the other side comes, this is your optimal diet, and then you kind of follow that. But until that day comes, at the moment, a low carbohydrate or carbohydrate restriction seems to be the most effective way for people to lose weight whilst not being as hungry. And I think this is one of the most important parts. Yeah,
so the way we approach that is we start by bringing, carbohydrate, getting rid of all the processed carbs, just having the slowest acting carbs at 25%. So you do that for 2 weeks. For almost everybody, again, except if you've got a really major, metabolic, challenge, or, a relatively unique phenotype, that's going to get you 90% of the way. And then you start adding back and seeing how your body responds. If your body, and we've got symptom trackers and tools that let you find where your tipping point is. So we don't need necessarily the genetic algorithm, determine that. You determine it based on your own experience. And when you overdo it, that's a great learning experience. You find, okay, that was my tipping point. I'm going to dial it back a little bit. And that's my personal prescription. And that may change with time, as people stay on healthy eating, their tolerance may improve. At times of stress, it may deteriorate. And so we always have to be mindful. But I think this approach allows for a broader flexibility for the general public than simply eliminating all essentially, keeping carbohydrates to 10%, which is a lot of work. Some people do it very well. Some people swear by it, but it's a lot of work, and I just don't see the general public going
completely embracing that. Yeah,
and I don't know that it's necessary. And there may be, we don't know what the long term, whether there are stresses to the genome. Whether there are ketones, beta hydroxybutyrate looks great in some ways for the genome. It may have anti-aging components, but there may be other aspects of extreme nutrient restriction, one macronutrient, that have adverse effects. So this is an exciting area of research. My mind is open. I don't have any biases, but I think that fine-tuning an approach based on your body's own feedback is really our best guide right now.
Fantastic advice. And do you have any kind of research projects coming up that are particularly interesting to you?
Oh, we've got a big study right now, which is a follow-up of that JAMA 2012 study, where we're doing the same protocol with 150 people studied. They'll remain on the diet rather than 1 month. They'll remain on that arm for about 5 months. So we should be able to see, really begin to understand how these different dietary compositions affect not just metabolism, but body composition and more meaningful markers of inflammation, stress, aging, and well-being.
Fantastic. And just off the top of my head, going back to that cortisol issue that you were talking about, do you think is it possible that could be a temporary thing whilst you change your metabolism, essentially?
Yes, it's very very possible that that's temporary. It's a transient phenomenon, and that's one of the things we're going to be very interested in looking at. It may be that for people who've been eating high carbohydrate diets, their metabolic pathways have all been revved up, maybe for better and for worse reasons, and that you shift to a very low carbohydrate diet, and it takes a while before you've really adapted, liver enzymes and brain pathways that will metabolize fatty acids and ketones. So we'll have to see as to whether that is a true downside of a very low carbohydrate diet or just a transient phenomenon.
That's fantastic. And do you know if there's an ETA on that at all? Are we talking years here, or?
And then just again to emphasize that it may occur in some people, like when we do an analysis statistically, if something happens big league in 1 out of 3 people, you may still see it statistically, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen to everybody. So there may, and I'm personally, I strongly believe that there are some people who seem to do fine on relatively low-fat diets, especially if you focus on slow-acting carbs. They're probably biologically different, and may some people, I've seen people who go on to low-carb diets and their LDL particle number explodes. Now, going from and their LDL will go from 150 to 300. Some people will say, well, those are big fluffy LDLs, but there's an awful lot of them, and so we just don't know. Whereas other people, their LDL doesn't change or may drop. So there's a lot to learn, and it's a very exciting era to be doing research in this field. We just need to get out of the old calorie in, calorie out, all calories are alike model that has impeded research in this area and actually blocked funding. We've had to resort to external philanthropy to fund some of these big studies. They cost millions of dollars. Very difficult to get this funded through the NIH. Fortunately, there are some philanthropists who are willing to invest in this kind of research. When you think of what a drug costs to develop, it's $1 billion. Why are we making nutrition research limp alone? Why do I have to beg and plead for $500,000, to do a research study when, it's so penny wise and pound foolish?
It's absolutely crazy. And on that note, what do you think of the most recent dietary guidelines for the US?
I think many of us were sorely disappointed. And the first line of it, was control your calorie balance. As if humans have conscious control over that. The simple retort to that is if conscious control over calorie balance were so important, how did humans manage to avoid massive swings in their body weight before the very notion of calories was invented?
It's so bizarre.
It's not that calories don't matter to the body. It's just that we don't have conscious control over it. It's like we don't have control over the long term. We have short-term control of our breathing. We have short-term control of our body temperature. I can just put on a heavy jacket and raise my temperature. But over the long term, we have primal regulatory systems in the hypothalamus and in ancient parts of the brain that control these things. They're more powerful over the long term than our conscious mind is. And we've got to break out of this simplistic prison caused by the first law of thermodynamics.
And we have to play into biology and biochemistry. And I said it in my own book that biochemistry leads and physics follows. And kind of you said similar stuff, I think, in Always Hungry as well. Would you agree with that, David?
Yes, absolutely. It's not that the physics is wrong. No, this is not trying to. We're not claiming that the law of thermodynamics doesn't work. It's just we've got the direction of causality in reverse. Overeating. So we know that people who are gaining weight, they're gaining fat and they're overeating. But is it that the overeating is driving the fat gain, or is the fat gain because it's sucking up too many calories, leaving too few for the rest of the body, making us hungry, driving overeating? It's like another metaphor I use is a fetus, a woman who's pregnant. She eats more and the fetus grows. But does eating more force the fetus to grow? Or does the growing fetus make the mother hungry and then make her eat more? Clearly the cause and effect is that the fetus growing makes the mother eat more. And similarly, fat cells that are growing too fast make us eat more. And if we don't, that doesn't ignore the rules of physics. And if you actually could force yourself not to eat more, you would slow down weight gain, but you wouldn't prevent fat gain. And we've shown this in a study. It's one of the few studies published in The Lancet on rodents back in my animal research days. Mm-hmm. We did keep animals from gaining weight excessively on a diet with a lot of processed carbohydrate, fast digesting, high glycemic carbohydrate. We controlled their weight gain by restricting their food intake. But when we analyzed their body composition, they had 70% more fat and thus less lean tissue. So what happens is that the fat cannibalizes energy from the rest of the body, and you can prevent weight gain, but still be a metabolic mess because you've got relatively too much fat and relatively too little lean tissue. That's a terrible state to be in. You're going to feel rotten, and you're going to be starving. So this eat less, move more model has done much more harm than good. It's still reigning supreme at the USDA.
It's another 5 years, right? I
wrote this book to help individuals with the program, and also to take on that paradigm directly. And I'm glad to be working with you in this campaign.
Absolutely, and it's very much needed, and hopefully this book, and it certainly does, becomes another treatise to changing things and improving things, more importantly, not just changing things for change's sake. But everybody that's listening and watching, highly recommend Always Hungry by Dr. David Ludwig. Make sure that you, there we go, get that a little bit closer. Make sure that you check it out on Amazon. If you go to smashthefat.com/HungryUS or smashthefat.com/HungryUK, that'll take you through to your requisite Amazon stores where you can check it out there. And if you buy it, then it helps put a little coal on the fire for the show. And you can also follow David on Twitter. If you go to twitter.com/David Ludwig MD, or on Facebook, facebook.com/David Ludwig MD as well. And then finally, his website is drdavidludwig.com. And was there anywhere else where people can find you or get in touch or just check out your stuff, David?
Yeah, you can join our email community on our web page, as you said, drdavidludwig.com. And if people are trying the program and have any questions, my wife will be happy to help people, provide any, if there are any problems, write to her and she'll respond. And lastly, I just wanted to say that the epilogue of the book also came from my heart, which was a political, very short, but it's a political statement, how we can reestablish nutritional sanity in the world, including a 10-step program, a 10-step recommendation. And the last 2 steps are vote with the ballot and vote with your fork. We need to make food policy based on public health and not special interest. And so this is a movement that I invite your viewers to join me, to join you on. My mantra is, maybe I'll just leave you with my mantra, which is to forget calories, focus on the quality of what you eat, and let your body do the rest.
Fantastic advice. Thank you so much today, Dr. Ludwig. That leaves us one more thing to do, which is to hear us smash it out. So at the end of every single show, we count to 3, and then our interviewee shouts "smash it out" to the camera. Is that okay?
Okay. Do I have to yell?
No, you can shout as loud or as quietly as you wish. Completely up to you. So 1, 2, 3.
Smash it out.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. David Ludwig, for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Everybody check out Always Hungry. And we hope to have you on the show soon, particularly after that research that you're doing at the moment comes out.
Wonderful. Great talking to you.
Thank you, David. Speak to you soon.
Bye.